They've got nothing to fear. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair.
Lewis Wall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am specifically going to talk about Supplementary Order Paper 172, and I want to commend my colleague Matiria Tudei for specifically focusing on a 3-year term. And the reason I do so is because I've just read an extract from the MBR from Philippa Howden-Chapman's book called Home Truths, and actually the average tenancy is 11 months. Now, the impact of that on families, on communities is pretty intense. And I specifically want to talk about a CPAG report called The Revolving Door, Student Mobility in Auckland Schools, dated May 2014. So the impact of transients on our children's learning is immense, and I'm sure the Minister would be interested to know that within that report, essentially it said, overall we found that student mobility often produces an array of negative psychological, social and academic consequences for children, but surprisingly in that particular report, Mr. Chair, it wasn't just the children living in transients that were affected, it was actually the entire school community. And so what we know is that stable communities produce better outcomes and for the social good. And the relevance, I guess, to electorates like mine in South Auckland is that our Pacific and Māori rates of home ownership are actually incredibly low. So for Pacific, it's 18%. For Māori, it's 28%. So, you know, this piece of legislation is incredibly important. And this amendment that Matiria Tudei is trying to have endorsed here in the House today is incredibly important, because allowing children to live in a home for 3 years actually is going to produce much better outcomes. And this is reflective in a Ministry of Education report from 2004, and it came from an ERO finding that basically said carefully planned and sequential learning experience were required for sustained learning that built upon previous learning. So the impact to our education system of having a housing system that does not provide stability to our most vulnerable communities and community members is incredibly important. And so the reason that I am standing up to support this particular part of Matiria Tudei's supplementary order paper is because enabling our families who are the most vulnerable to have 3 years of living in the same home is actually going to have a huge impact on our children's learning. But not only that, and we think that children's learning actually starts as 5-year-olds or 6-year-olds when we have compulsory education. But what Shirley Maihi found in Finlayson Park School in my electorate was that actually it impacts on early child education learning. And so the compounding effect of children not having sustained early childhood education when they're 3, 4 and 5 actually then means they enter the school system and they're already behind. And so the long-term implications for not enabling our families and our children to have some security in that tenancy is incredibly important. And this then leads to the first part of Matiria Tudei's SOP, which is when the tenancy terminates, the tenant has the right to renew that tenancy, and hopefully for another 6 years. So in fact, we build an ability for families to create homes, to be part of communities, to be part of their school communities, to have a secure base, to be able to go to school, for parents to be able to get extra education, to go to work. But I think we completely underestimate how vital a home is in the overall development of our children and society. So I hope that people who are here today in the House participating in the debate will take seriously the impact of insecure housing on our the ability of our children to learn. Because I actually think it's missing in this whole debate. You know, we're not talking or thinking about the ongoing consequences. We know there's 26,000 NEET kids out there that are kids who are not engaged in education, employment or training, but they don't just manifest out of nowhere. They actually manifest because fundamentally at the beginning of their lives, those children do not have a stable base They do not have a home. They do not go to early childhood education. They do not go to school. And for people who think that this is irrelevant, actually I've got within my electorate kids who have been to... Mr Chair.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Chairman, firstly, can I